Hello everyone, Daryn Wood here. So Infinity War is just around the corner and I am so excited. I'm so anxious to see how it's going to turn out, and based on the information we have so far, it looks like it's going to be something entirely different, something the MCU has never done before. Not only is it going to feature over 30 different characters, Kevin Feige has said that Thanos will pretty much be the main character of the film, which got me thinking about the MCU's villain problem, which I think we can all agree at this point that for the most part, the MCU has weak villains. And since Feige has said that Infinity War is going to be focused on Thanos, it's got me wondering how a studio that has primarily focused on heroes going to make a movie that is focused on a villain. So first, let's talk about Marvel's villain problem. When you watch a Marvel movie, you can just expect that the focus is going to be solely on the hero. We know it, Marvel knows it. Kevin Feige even said recently, a big criticism of ours is that we focus on the heroes more than the villains, and I think that's probably true, but I don't think it will always be true. But what I mean by a villain problem is that because the MCU focuses more on the heroes, they usually don't put a lot of effort into their villains. Their villains tend to be stereotypical, one-dimensional, underdeveloped bad guys that are there solely to provide a physical, tangible threat for the hero to fight. They have a very 1950s, 1960s vibe about them, very Monster of the Week kind of deal. They're evil just for the sake of being evil, and they're after some form of world domination. I would say out of 18 movies, the MCU has only had like 4 strong villains, 3 were just okay, and the rest were just completely forgettable. But that's not to say it's necessarily affecting the quality of their movies, because most of their movies are still damn good. As movies like Captain America and the Avengers and Civil War and Thor Ragnarok have shown, you don't need a good villain to make a good movie. And as movies like Thor have shown, a good villain doesn't necessarily make a good movie. And my usual opinion is that a hero story is no good without an equally interesting and well-developed antagonist, but somehow, some way, the MCU has gotten away with it for 10 years, just coasting on their heroes, but no, they make up for it. They usually tell a good enough hero story that we just, forgive their shitty villain. Plus, I feel like they spend so much time building the hero story that there's, no time left to create a thoughtful villain anyway. For example, in Doctor Strange, Caecilius was lame as fuck, but I feel like his sorry-ass story was all they could fit in, because I feel like they set up Mordo to be a really good villain for the next Doctor Strange movie. I like his whole stance about there being too many magicians, but because they had to show Doctor Strange's journey to become the Sorcerer Supreme, they didn't have time to get into the misuse of magic, so they just, settled for Caecilius's basic ass. But to be fair, focusing on heroes over villains has definitely worked for their family-friendly, fun-time style. It's definitely on brand. Feige said that in 2008, both Iron Man and The Dark Knight came out, and Marvel was just like, okay, they're focusing on the villain, we're focusing on the hero, that's fine, we don't mind, we like it. They weren't out here trying to make another campy, ridiculous comic book movie, but they also weren't out here to make another dark and gritty comic book movie, which at the time were the only 2 options. It was either spandex and silliness or leather and darkness. And while the campy movies were a lot of fun, they weren't taken very seriously. And then while the dark and gritty movies were taken seriously, they lost a lot of the fun of comic books. And then Marvel stepped in and was like, hey, we can have fun and still tell a strong, thoughtful story. And they did that by focusing the development on the heroes. Because when you start getting into villain development is when you start getting into moral gray areas and becoming less kid-friendly. And at the end of the day, the MCU movies are still family movies. They don't want to get too dark or too morally ambiguous. They want to tell an uplifting tale of triumph. It's the brand they've created and it works for them. So, does the MCU's villain problem even really matter? Well, not really, because they've been doing just fine, but also, yes, because Infinity War is going to be a whole new ballgame. And also, now that they've gotten past the origin story phase, they can't keep relying on the hero's journey to carry all the weight. If you've noticed, sequel movies tend to be weaker because once the audience knows the character needs to be challenged, or else it just feels like a replay of the same old shit. And at this point, we've all seen them so many times, we know them pretty well, we know where they came from, we know what they're about. It's time to see them be challenged and grow as characters, and there's no better way to do that than with with a strong antagonist. Like, the reason why Spider-Man Homecoming didn't feel redundant is because instead of focusing on Peter Parker, who we all know pretty well by now, they used the very grounded, antagonizing force of the Vulture to rediscover Spider-Man for a new age. The Vulture challenged Spider-Man's ethics, maturities, and loyalties. By using the Vulture, Spider-Man Homecoming told a very realistic modern story about the decline of manufacturing and labor jobs in the US and the burden of the middle class and the economic disparity it all creates, which isn't necessarily a Spider-Man story, but it pulls out very authentic Spider-Man moments from the character. Because Peter Parker is lower middle class, and he does look out for the little guy, but he also loves being a part of the superhero community and is very close with Tony Stark. So while the antagonizing force creates a solid story, we still see very authentic Spider-Man moments, like his tendency to overwhelm himself and be way too hard on himself, but also his lion heart and his teenage body and his pure righteousness and his relentless perseverance. But getting back to Infinity War, Kevin Feige has said that Thanos will pretty much be the main character of this movie, and that makes me a little wary for a few reasons. One, this is completely new territory for the MCU, and I don't know if they have the stones for it. If they're really going to focus on him, they're really going to have to show us who he is, and that means the good, the bad, and the really, really ugly, because the best villains are just as horrifying as they are sympathetic. And two, like I said earlier, the MCU has a tendency to rely on big, bad, one-dimensional villains, and in the comics, Thanos is kind of a big bad one-dimensional villain. So for years I was worried that they're going to take it in that direction, because even though in the comics they retconned his origin story, I just always felt like he wasn't a villain that would translate well to the big screen. First off, because I knew he would be a CGI character, and I hate CGI characters. They always bring the performance value and the sense of realism way down. Second, to state it plainly, he really is just an inherently evil dude that wants all the power in the universe and is willing to kill whoever to get it. And in this day and age, that kind of basic bitch villain just doesn't really cut it anymore. And third, I did not see his creepy tragic romance with Mistress Death playing out well for the family crowd. But from what Feige has told us about the MCU's version of Thanos' origin, they're totally reworking him, so I have no idea how it's going to play out. They're ditching the Mistress Death thing, and they're making him a more sympathetic character with a warped view of the universe born from traumatic experiences. What we know is that Thanos is the last of his kind. His people caused their own extinction and the destruction of their planet, despite Thanos' attempts to warn them and stop them, and so he vows to never let that happen again. He feels the constant outward expansion of life is ruining the universe, so he begins a crusade to save the universe from itself. I'm guessing it's gonna go something like this. When he was younger, he saw his people doing a bunch of awful shit, most likely something hedonistic or wasteful, and despite his best efforts, they still ended up destroying themselves and their planet, because he has that line in the trailer where he's like, in time, you'll know what it's like to lose, to feel so desperately that you are right and yet to fail, all the same. So it seems like the traumatic experience breaks him, and he's just like, I tried to help, but you people won't fucking listen, so I'll just do it by force, because it doesn't matter if you're right. If you want to be right, you gotta acquire the power and make it happen. There are too many people in the universe using up all the resources, and they don't deserve it, and they're ruining it for everybody else, so I'm gonna get rid of all the bad eggs, and like it said in the trailer, balance the universe. And he'll probably be a little Dr. Doomy about it and think he's like the only man for the job because he's the only one willing to do what it takes, and that it's like his destiny to acquire all the Infinity Stones and take the universe in the right direction. Because again, like he said in the trailer, destiny still arrives. So he starts collecting the Infinity Stones with the help of his Black Order, which are the mightiest beings from their respective planets that he's conquered along the way, which is probably how he came about adopting Gamora and Nebula as well. And they'll probably try to humanize him by showing his distorted fatherly relationship with Gamora, because I'm guessing he loves her in his own fucked up way, but only because she's the best, based on how he like tortures Nebula just because she's the weaker one. And if they add that Nebula torture sequence from the comics where he makes her like a half-dead living corpse, I will be very surprised, because it's brutal. And I will say, there is potential for a really good villain story there. But the bottom line is, even though these are all great plot points, it won't mean shit if he's not developed properly. A character can have a moving story and clear and believable motivations, but if the character isn't fully developed, then none of it will resonate. Because we either have to be on board with his shit or enraptured by his insanity, and in the best cases, both. Marvel is just gonna have to really spend time making sure we are invested in Thanos and that we care about what he cares about. They can't half-ass it like they did with Ivan Vanko and Iron Man 2. Like, all the right pieces were there for a good villain. His villainy made sense. His life was ruined by the Starks. He grew up in exile with a bitter, alcoholic father who constantly blamed the Starks for their lot in life. He had seen firsthand the destruction and pain that Stark weapons have brought down on this world, and while he's sitting in his shitty little house, he's watching billionaire Tony Stark congratulate himself for being a hero, while war-stricken communities that Stark weapons were used on still live in poverty. And because his father invented the arc reactor with Howard Stark, he was able to recognize how Tony powered his suit and present a formidable challenge. Like, those are clear and understandable motivations. He saw Tony Stark as a privileged war profiteer parading himself around as a hero, and he wanted to break him down by destroying his legacy and force him to face the truth of his actions. But instead of using Ivan to challenge Tony as a hero and as a person, we barely spend any time with him. There was an opportunity to get into Tony's guilt with being a war profiteer and how he's trying to rectify that by being Iron Man, and how he really does want to change the Stark legacy, but at the end of the day, he built the best weapon for himself. But instead they just showed Tony being like, fuck my legacy, I'm dying. So if Infinity War is going to work, we're really gonna have to feel Thanos' pain. Like, they're really gonna have to sell his angle. Because think of the MCU's best villains, Vulture and Killmonger. Like, even though they were doing some really fucked up shit, a part of you was on their side. Like, you genuinely felt for their stories. So I hope we get a really intimate look into Thanos' whole deal, because I want the MCU's biggest, baddest villain to take us on a wild ride. But we will have to wait till next week to find out. But what do you guys think about the MCU's villains? I would love to hear your take on them in the comments below. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please check out my other ones and share it with a friend. Don't forget to give me a like, give me subscribe, go follow me on Twitter. I put out new videos on the 1st of every month, and if you haven't checked it out yet, I have been live streaming all the MCU movies every Sunday on Twitch at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so I invite you to join. It's been a lot of fun. The information will also be below, but that is all for now, and I will see you next time.